Okay, the weather outside is doing horrible things, so this video is just going to be a random mishmash of bits and pieces. Bit of a channel update and an assortment of random things that aren't really important enough to cover in their own video. These are my bramble stems that I've been out picking this week. I think I've probably got enough here to make a basket, so these are just sitting here. They've actually dried quite a lot already, but we're going to let them dry some more, and I think I'll probably go and pick some more, because once we get out of the season, it won't be possible to get any more of these. I need to make sure I've got enough to cover any mistakes or anything that might happen during the basket making. So that's bramble stems. I've also been out collecting forked sticks. And so this is for a project that's coming up soon. I can't tell you what it is, but I can tell you it's not slingshots. So this project is coming in the next week or two. Thank you to everyone who voiced their support on my channel update video last week about my statement of intent for reviews versus craft videos for this channel. We're going to carry on doing a real random assortment of stuff, and I'm so glad to hear that some of you out there are really up for that. So thank you to everyone who voiced their support. So I thought I'd just talk about review methodology, because my reviews are typically reviews of things that I intend to use. So unlike other channels, I'm not unboxing something that I'm detached from. I'm unboxing something which I have a vested interest in. That makes me rather biased. Now, bias in reviews can be a good or bad thing. I do try to keep objective, but bear in mind that when I review something, I'm probably focusing on the features that I'm most interested in. So I was just thinking about this actually, and thinking how to express that. Why is it that I will disagree with other people on whether something is a good or a bad product? So here's how it works. In any device, there will be features which are good or bad. And of those features, I will either care or not care. Now, here's what happens. So for a feature that's good but I don't care, let's say we review a phone and it's good at gaming. Now, yeah, great, it's good at gaming. That makes it kind of, in some ways, objectively a good phone, but I don't care, because that's not a feature I really want. And let's say there might be a bad feature, like no headphone jack. But again, I don't care. So I'm not going to score these good or bad features very highly in my review. I'm not going to really care that it's got no headphone jack, but I also don't care that it's good at gaming. The features I'm going to talk about most, and the ones I'm going to focus on, and the ones that are going to influence my judgment of the review, are the things that I care about. So when we talk about cameras and video functions and photo, let's say, if those are in the bad category and I care, that is a deal breaker. So really, when I assess phones, I'm looking for features that are good, that I care about, to be in here. So anything that's in this box here is going to be the thing that influence my perception. And if it's got stuff in this box, that makes it a good product as far as I'm concerned. If it's got stuff in this box here that's bad, but I care, that makes it a bad product. From my point of view. All the stuff down here might make it a good or bad product objectively, but doesn't matter to me at all. And so here's the thing. So moving between categories, how are you going to get me to care that it's a good gaming phone? You're probably just not. So you might comment on my review and say your review's wrong because this phone is good at gaming, or the screen's good, or you know, whatever else it is. But you're not going to make me care about something that isn't of interest to me. And likewise, If something's a bad feature, you're not going to persuade me that it's good. So you're not going to move things from the bad category into the good just by arguing with me. And you're not going to move things from the don't care category into the care category just by arguing with me. Now, you'll have a different grid for this, for your judgment. You'll probably have a different category of things in care and don't care. However, bad and good are kind of measurable. You know, the fact that there is no headphone jack isn't something you're going to argue about. It either is there or it isn't. And the fact that it's good at gaming is something we can benchmark. So the good and the bad we can measure. The care and the don't care is subjective. So all of the time when I review a product, you'll be getting my perception based on what lands in this box here. So I hope that's made my position clear on reviews. They are very subjective, even though I try to be factual, because ultimately I'm reviewing products that I want to use. I don't just review any old stuff. I get manufacturers asking me to review things that I don't really have any interest in or use for, and I turn those away. I'm going to review products that I'm interested in using, and so that gives me a vested interest in making sure that the stuff that I review, the features, are based on what lands in this box. I just want to show you something I found outside here. Now, just took the dog out to visit the garden, and as I was walking down the path, quite a lot of earthworms, and some of them were extended right across the path, and we found that when we shine the light on them, they tend to retract back into their holes, some of them quite rapidly. However, there are a couple of worms here that didn't retract back into their holes, because what we've got here is earthworms mating. Now, earthworms are hermaphrodites, so both of them are male and female, and so what they're doing here is they're linked together by, well, they've secreted between the two of them a kind of band of mucus that's stuck them together, and inside that mucus they'll be exchanging reproductive materials, and then they'll both pull out of that and leave a little pocket of kind of slime that contains the eggs, and it becomes a little capsule for their eggs, and then the eggs hatch out within there and become juvenile earthworms. So there we go, that's what earthworms look like when they're mating. Worm porn. Right, well, we've been out foraging today and we found a lovely basket full of chanterelles and hedgehog mushrooms. More than I can possibly use here. I'll give some away to friends, but I'm also going to set some up for drying for later use. So a word about materials. I've got my wire rack here, and on top of the wire rack I'm using this stuff, which is like a plastic non-stick mesh. It's designed for baking things like fries and chicken nuggets in the oven to stop them sticking to the tray. So it's a non-stick, heat-proof but plastic mesh. But the reason I want it is because it's very fine. It's like maybe a 1/4 of a centimetre grid, which means my mushroom pieces, even when they shrink down, will not fall through the grid. Okay, so all I'm going to do is just carefully brush off using a little paintbrush just any little pieces of dirt and debris that we've got adhering to the mushroom. I'm going to try to leave these spines underneath alone. So we're just brushing off dirt. If there's any on the stem, I can scrape it off with a knife like that. And then we'll just slice that into thin pieces. And we'll place them on the tray to dry, like so. Now, I'm not sure whether some of these little spines are going to fall off when we dry the mushrooms, so I'm going to try to leave them with the spine side upwards to prevent them just all flaking off. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on and we'll put those all out on the tray, sliced and ready to dry. Okay, so there we go. I'm just going to do one tray, I think, of hedgehog mushrooms. We'll just dry those out. So I'm just going to leave those in an airy place now. If it's not warm enough or dry enough to dry them naturally, you can just get an ordinary household fan and blow air across them, and that will help them to dry. But I think it's warm enough at the moment that they will probably dry naturally on their own. I'm going to put a piece of paper underneath these when I put them up on the rack, because they are shedding some of the little spines, which I think will probably make a mess. So I'm going to put a piece of paper under there to catch those. So this is what's happened after a week of drying for the hedgehog mushrooms. Not as crisp as some other species tend to go, but these are now fully dry, and the spines were quite easy to shed when they were fresh, but they're not coming off quite so much now, although some of them have come off during the drying process. But all of that stuff, I'm just going to tip that into the jar, because that is just dried mushroom. Interestingly, these did not smell very mushroomy while they were drying, so they didn't stink the house out, but that's good. So now that these are dry though, they have got quite a musky mushroom odour, which is good because that equates to flavour. So I'm just going to put these in the jar mixed in with the others. So back home now, let's have a look and see what we got today. So in terms of mushrooms, we have actually got some hedgehog mushrooms, just a few little yellow chanterelles, and then we found some grey oyster mushrooms. These are Pleurotus austriatus, and then we've got some white oyster mushrooms here, which I think are Pleurotus pulmonaria or Pleurotus cornucopiae. These are actually quite heavy and moist feeling. Now, the thing with oyster mushrooms is we did see on some of the ones at the different site where I didn't pick these, that there were a lot of little fungus gnats around. So the thing to do with these is just to open the gills up and have a look inside, because if there are insect larvae in there, we'll see them in between the gills, because on oyster mushrooms they tend to just live in between the gills, and I can't see any evidence of that at all on those. So really pleased with those. And we've got a couple of nice big clumps of these oyster mushrooms. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to clean some of these up and dry them, because I've got more than I can use here. So the usual deal. So we've just got a little bowl here, stiff paintbrush, sharp knife and a piece of kitchen paper. And I'm just going to take these smaller oyster mushrooms here and brush out any little pieces of dirt and debris that are in amongst the gills or on the tops of the caps, like that. They are pretty clean because of course they're growing off the ground, but they did get a little bit of dirt when I put them in the basket with other things. There we go. And then I think we'll just actually tear them. Yeah, they'll tear just fine. So we're going to tear them into pieces like that to dry. Tear them into strips. And then we'll lay all of these out, usual deal, on a wire rack on top of this baking grid, which is like a plastic lattice that's used for baking things like oven fries and chicken nuggets. It's a non-stick, but it's polymer based mesh. So we would just then lay these pieces out on top of that mesh. Try and spread them out so they're not touching too much. These are quite wet mushrooms actually by their nature, and also the fact that it has rained in the last 24 hours before I picked these. So I'm going to tear them into fairly small pieces so that they dry quickly. And that's it. And with the larger ones, the other species, I think I'll probably cook some of these fresh. But again, I'm just going to wipe them over the top, get the excess moisture off them, cut the woody base off the bottom, and again we will just tear these into strips like this for drying. And they tear up quite nicely from the edge of the cap inwards, like that. And as long as I tear them into smallish pieces, they should dry just fine. So there we go, I've just got the ordinary household fan blowing some air across these. It's a good way to get them started and to make sure that they get off to a good start, get most of the moisture out. Because once they begin to dry, they will dry naturally very quickly, but often it's the first little bit of moisture that you need to lose so that the cells start to break down and then they can begin drying properly. So here we are after 4 days, I think, only 4 days, and these oyster mushrooms have dried up completely into little curly, very light, very dry little shreds of mushroom. And the aroma of these oyster mushrooms, even though it was quite subtle when it was fresh, has really intensified. And so I would say these have now got an aroma that rivals porcini. So we're going to pack them in our jar of mixed mushrooms. So in here, there's hardly enough space, but I'm going to tip all of these out, mix those in, and then put them back in the jar so that they remain mixed. So in this jar we've got fairy ring mushrooms, we've got horse mushrooms, we've got chanterelles, we've got hedgehog mushrooms, and we're going to have oyster mushrooms. So we've got 5 species of mushrooms in there. So we'll tip out the existing mushroom mix, which is great. Add in our oyster mushrooms. Some of them have tangled up with the mesh as they've twisted and dried. So we just break those out. Don't want to waste any little bits. So we'll just mix those together. So yeah, we've got 5 species of mixed mushrooms there. And I wish I could tell you how good that smells. You're just going to have to take my word for it that the aroma of these mixed dried mushrooms is just amazing. So I think that's probably all I'm going to have room for in this jar now. But if I find any more mushrooms this autumn, we'll maybe do another jar, maybe with a different mix of species. So just give those a little jiggle and a shake and they will settle down a bit, making some more space at the top. So there we go, a bit of a tight squeeze, but we got them in there. So there we have a jar of mixed dried mushrooms. And there's probably about 3 basketfuls of mushrooms dried down into here. So as you can imagine, the flavour is going to be quite intense. Now, on the subject of drying mushrooms, I have found that actually drying them naturally, I think, is the best way to get the aroma out of them. I think if you dry them artificially by putting them in an oven, you'll tend to get dried mushrooms, but you won't get that intense, rich mushroom flavour. Because I believe what's happening when you dry mushrooms is there's a ripening process that's going on during the first stages of drying. And so there's almost like a fermentation going on, which brings out that intense mushroom aroma. So even things like the agaricus mushrooms, which weren't particularly aromatic when they were fresh, have got a really punchy, intense mushroom flavour once they're dried. So I am an advocate of drying mushrooms naturally on a rack, just by airflow, just by leaving them in a cool, dry place and letting them dry naturally over the course of several days. I think natural is best here. So that's my dried mushrooms. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.